If you're really stiff like I used to be, then here are my top 3 exercises you're going to want to prioritize in your flexibility training routine. Now, really stiff is a relative way to describe your current range of motion because what we know is really flexible people as well also feel stiff. So what I'm referring to is an extreme restriction in range of motion. These are exercises that you can do at all levels and they can be regressed and progressed. So what I mean by really stiff is you can't touch halfway down your shins in a forward fold without significantly rounding your back and bending your knees. You can't even squat to parallel. And when you move the leg back into extension, it just comes with a significant lumbar spine arch as the pelvis kind of just comes along for the ride and you can't even access some genuine hip extension. So I'm going to show you 3 bang for your buck exercises that are going to target some of the main restrictions that really stiff people experience, such as the hip rotators, improving hip internal rotation, which is going to help improve the space within the joint to flex the hip, extend the hip, even abduct it. And it's going to help release some tight adductors. And then also the posterior hip capsule, the glutes, the proximal hamstrings, and the front of the hip flexors. These are all muscles that are very stubborn in the extremely stiff population. And I wanted to make this video because when I was first getting into flexibility training, I was choosing exercises that were way ahead of my current level, exercises I had no business doing. And it was leading to increased stiffness. And I wasn't getting the results I want because I was just compensating. When you look up flexibility exercises to do, you'll see them done on the floor in these obscure positions. Maybe it's a 90-90, pigeon pose, a seated pancake, or a butterfly position. These are all positions that require a prerequisite level of mobility to get into in the first place. So the exercises I'm going to show you, they're all going to be standing. The best thing about standing exercises is the body starts in a neutral position. So of course, when it comes to something like hip flexion, if I don't even have 90 degrees of hip flexion to begin with, then I have no business doing a exercise to improve hip flexion in a seated position, such as trying to stretch my hamstrings. From this position, I can fold forward, I have the leverage of gravity, and I could start from a neutral position and move into my restriction without as much compensation. Now that hamstring stretch is just one example, but I'm going to show you many others. The first one is going to be for hip rotation, the second is going to be for hip flexion, and then the third will be for hip extension. So let's get into it. Okay, this first exercise is going to be for hip internal rotation. Typical positions to improve internal rotation might be in the 90-90 position, or even a position I like to train internal rotation in myself, half kneeling. But the problem is, if you're really, really stiff, you're going to have trouble even getting into half kneeling. You're going to have trouble sitting in a 90-90 position without a ton of spinal compensation. So this is why I really like the standing position to train internal rotation. So we're going to start with the toes pointed forward, and we're going to slightly abduct the hip. So we're not going into a full middle split and fully abduct. We shouldn't feel a ton of adductor stretch at the moment, but we should just be slightly abducted. So the feet are just outside of hip width. And this is going to provide some slack in the hip joint to move into internal rotation as I rotate the pelvis across this stretching side hip. So say I'm stretching my right hip here. I'm going to create a subtle anterior pelvic tilt, okay? So I'm not trying to push my hip forward and squeeze the glute, okay? I want to keep the glute relaxed with this. This is a key part of improving internal rotation. And then I'm going to rotate my pelvis toward this stretching side leg. So my hip is going to move slightly back. So if you see this from the side, I'm not keeping my hip pushed forward because then I have no space to rotate into it. As I rotate, notice how my hip pushes backwards slightly. And I'm going to feel a nice joint capsule stretch, okay? So in this position, we can kind of dynamically move back and forth. We just want to make sure as we're doing these dynamic motions that the foot doesn't come along for the ride. So make sure the foot is nice and stationary and you have grippy shoes or even bare feet. Now we can hold statically and perform some contract relax. So the first contraction is spinning my heel inward. Okay, it's as if I was trying to externally rotate. Okay, so I'm spinning that inward. Should feel those hip rotators contracting. Okay, now I'm going to relax that tension and then try to rotate a little bit more. And then I can sort of lean into it a bit more. Again, contract. And then relax, rotate a little bit more. If you're feeling any torque through the knee here, then you can bend that knee just a bit. Contract and relax. Okay? So after I do that contract relax to improve that passive internal rotation, what I'll then do is bring the foot back in, go on one leg, and then just do some rotations here where I turn the pelvis away, turn the pelvis toward. So this is going to be more active. So now I'm teaching the nervous system to move into internal rotation through external rotation. And you might find you actually have pretty poor balance here, and the ability to pull yourself into internal rotation is much more limited than it is when you perform the passive contract relax. So if you're somebody who does a lot of stretching, but that doesn't stick, and you notice a big limitation here, then you're going to definitely want to integrate this. So what I'll typically do here is set a timer for a minute, minute and a half, and just go until the hip starts really burning. And the main thing is you want to pause in this internal rotation. 2 to 3 seconds. Really get those hip rotators firing, really get the adductors firing. And then what I'll do is I'll retest my hip abduction and see if it's less pinchy in the hip and I could go a bit further on this side that I just stretched. So really nice one. Give this a try for 3 to 5 contract relax cycles and then a minute to a minute and a half of active rotations. Okay, this next drill to improve hip flexion and really sink into that posterior hip capsule and improve that flexibility in the glutes and hamstrings is the elephant walk. Now, the traditional elephant walk is more of a dynamic drill where you're simply bending one leg, which rotates your pelvis toward the stretching side leg as you straighten this one and pull it back. And the idea is to feel a nice stretch in this posterior lateral hip as well as the outside of the hamstring here, which is everyone's tightest hamstring. So this is kind of rocking back and forth as a gentle mobilization. But what I like to do is actually do some, contract relax or even loaded holds in the position. So if you're somebody who is stuck here with your forward fold, you're going to need to elevate this surface for your hands. So this might be a good height, maybe even something a little bit higher, stack some yoga blocks on here. And it's okay to have a rounded spine in this position, okay? We're not looking for a full spinal extension here. We can let everything fold forward with the intent to pull the pelvis up and forward into an anterior tilt, even though we're in this spinal flexion. Okay, so I'm going to start with one leg, so my left leg, and I'm going to bend this right leg. Okay, and that's going to turn me into this left side. So what I'm going to do is drop my forearm on the same side of the leg that's stretching. So again, if you're very inflexible, you're going to need to elevate this. Okay, you can even just go hand support here. And then I'm going to take my other hand, I'm going to put it behind the knee pit of my bent leg. Then what I'm going to do is contract by pulling the back of the knee into my hand. It's as if I'm attempting to rotate my pelvis the opposite side. Okay? And then I'm going to relax. And then just simply try to pull this knee more forward. and turn my belly button toward the stretching side leg. Now, I'm going to show you from the back. Expose that booty. Here's what we don't want to happen is as I turn more into this leg, this pelvis just kind of comes along for the ride. The hip moves too far inside of the foot. We want to keep that hip directly over the foot, or if anything, a little bit shifted outside so we can get that nice posterior lateral hip stretch. Okay, so as I contract, trying to rotate my pelvis away isometrically, simultaneously dragging my straight leg foot down and back into the ground, and then relax. Try to pull this knee forward more, but still keep that hip shifted out to the side. So after each contraction, I could keep rotating and I could keep sinking a little bit deeper. So the idea is to really feel a strong stretch in this back of the hip, which is going to help you find more of a hamstring stretch. So now what we can do is start to load that position a little bit more so we could take away that support. I'll do my other side here, and we could just cradle this dumbbell here, so kind of like a Zercher position. Okay, keep that leg straight, round forward. I can inhale, relax, move deeper. I could kind of rock in and out of it like a Jefferson curl, keeping my spine nice and rounded. Now notice what I'm doing here is as I'm going down, I'm pulling this left knee forward. As I'm coming up, I'm turning back out of it. So there's a huge emphasis here on rotation. I like to really try to keep this knee straight as well. Okay, so we don't want to see a lot of knee bend here because now we're just going to load the quads too much. We want to keep the knee straight so we can fully load that posterior hip capsule. All right, so if you're really stiff again, you're going to want to have some hand support to start, but once you get more comfortable with this and you want to progress it, you can add that load. So maybe that's how far you're going down. So notice that twist in my torso. Okay, so give this one a try. There's many options, dynamic reps, and then contract relax cycles with more support. This last drill is going to be for the hip flexors. Now, I really like a high box elevated hip flexor stretch because what happens is if we're limited in hip flexion, then this is going to drag the pelvis under early. So we're using femoral flexion on this front leg to help assist in a strong hip flexor stretch on the back leg. And this is really nice, especially if you have a very restricted starting point. You don't have to go into these deep lunge style stretches where you need already a pretty decent amount of hip flexion on this front leg. And you need to be able to keep the torso upright in this position to get a strong stretch here. So there is a prerequisite level of hip extension needed to do some of these floor-based stretches more effectively. So I like these front foot elevated hip flexor stretches because now we have a high amount of leverage. This basically posteriorly tilts the pelvis and then drops the pelvis on this side, which will already lengthen the psoas. And then we can just add some load here. So I can hold a weight in this position. I could get on my toes, pull the heel back, straighten out this knee. We can kind of rock forward and shift. Okay, we can even go arm overhead, rock forward and shift. I like to kind of lean forward, bring this leg back a bit, hold the weight here, and bend, do kind of a split squat, and then extend the knee, bend, extend the knee. And again, like this is relative, of course. If you don't even have 75 degrees of hip flexion, maybe a low box is all you need to achieve that tucking under of the pelvis. I have clients in their 70s that are doing this drill. This is the amount of elevation that they need, and they find a really strong hip flexor stretch. So again, this is a totally fine and acceptable elevation. So we can do knee extensions like I just demonstrated, so that's more sagittal plane style motion. We can even get into the rotational planes because the hip flexors, the psoas, the adductors, they function in multiple planes of motion. So we don't want to just stretch them forward and back, but we can take the weight, we can rotate fully the other way. This helps kind of bring the pelvis along for the ride. Okay, we can even do some back bending. So as I extend the spine, I send the hip forward. Okay, this can all be done unloaded as well. Okay, and we can even do side bending in this position, where the hip moves laterally as you side bend to the opposite side. So a lot of options in this front foot elevated position, and we have a high degree of stability because my center of mass is all under my base of support. Okay, I don't have to get into these very extended lunge positions to get a good stretch, to where now I'm very limited. It's very tough to rotate, it's very tough to side bend, even in this kneeling position, because I have to get into a larger degree of femoral extension on the back leg to find a stretch, as opposed to if I was elevated with this front foot, then I could keep this back knee closer to my hip, if that makes sense. So plenty of options to explore here. Pick one variation, do all three of them, and do 10 reps each dynamically, and then hold the final position for about 10 to 20 seconds. There you have it. So these are my top 3 options for somebody who's very stiff and they want to improve their flexibility, just like myself, just how I was when I was first getting into flexibility training. Don't worry about the very fancy shapes, the splits, the pancake, the super deep squats. Get the fundamentals down first. Can you extend the hip? Can you flex the hip? Can you rotate? Exercises like this will have huge carryover down the line when you do want to get into some of those more advanced positions. Now, if you want to get the most out of these stretches, here is the key. Do not just do one set of them and walk away. I like to say that the first set of stretches is kind of like a throwaway set. So you're basically just shaking off the rust from being stiff in that first set. And then the second set, the third set, you're going to get more and more flexible as the nervous system accommodates to the demand, as there's kind of a potentiation that happens set to set, where you basically signal to the nervous system, it senses safety after you do these kind of contractions in the position, you load the position. So very important, do multiple sets. Do about 2 to 4 sets of this, and then do it less frequently. So perform it 2 to 3 days a week, 2 to 4 sets. Maybe one of those days a week you're really pushing it. Maybe one of those days you're doing 4 sets, the rest of the days you're just doing 2. So you give your body adequate recovery, but you still have that one day to really push the stimulus, to really go deep into your flexibility. So this is what I would recommend. If you give these exercises a try, please let me know in the comments how you enjoyed them. If you would like personal help in your flexibility journey this year and want a tailored program designed around your current level and main limitations, please reach out. Let's discuss online coaching options. Till then, stay supple.